Okay, here we go. Now we are on our third little mini lecture to help us better understand what your discussion board is about. And we're going to focus on the baby boom in suburbia, hopefully, in this one. One of the things that you need to understand, again, and I've mentioned this before, I'm going to sort of review some of this. This was a quote from a British visitor to the United States, where they had said that it seems to me that every other young housewife I see is pregnant in America in 1958. And part of that is because of the fact that there is a huge baby boom. And this directly goes to the fact that when the soldiers came home from war, one of the first things they did was get married and obviously start having children. And if you look at the chart here below, it's really obvious that we start to see a huge increase in babies born from 1946 through 1960. And then we start to see it go down in the 1960s. And there'll be reasons for that. One of the reasons is going to be the mood in this country in the 1960s that's going to do that. But we see this huge increase throughout the late 40s and throughout the 1950s, which is going to make this time period known as the baby boom. In 1957, one baby was born every 7 seconds in this country, which is a pretty incredible number. Marriage and family was seen as the key to happiness in America in the 1950s. Again, it's that idea of normalcy, the idea of we don't want anything outside of the box. We want everybody to do what they're supposed to do. You get married, you're happy. The other thing is the idea is the more money you have, the more children people will have. And that's basically a rule of thumb throughout history. When people have money, you tend to see populations grow because they can afford to have the population grow. And that's what's going to happen again as we start to move into a middle class society. And again, this is one of the reasons why our economy is going to boom, as I mentioned before, because you're creating a whole other market. You're creating a market for children, a market that had never existed before, which means the factories are going to have to expand, which means they're going to have to start to produce more toys, more again, different foods and stuff like that that are going to be more geared towards children. So this is going to have a tremendous impact on our economy. Dr. Benjamin Spock, not Dr. Spock from Star Trek, but Dr. Benjamin Spock became sort of the child raising guru of the 1950s. He's the one that's sort of telling people how they should raise their kids. Dr. Spock is a huge advocate for actually corporal punishment or spanking kids, things like that. So you saw a lot of stuff like that going on in 1950s, 1960s, and even into the 1970s. Of course, some of that stuff goes out of vogue as we start to move forward because we realize that some of those methods aren't exactly good for children. Another thing that we start to see during this time period is school enrollment is going to go up. Now, school enrollment partially increases because of the fact that parents don't have to have kids work. So therefore, children are going to be able to go to school instead of go to work. So that's one significant thing. Also the fact that there are simply more kids. But again, like I said, the fact that you had child labor down in this area here does sort of skew the numbers a little bit as far as school enrollment. But what we see by the 1970s, we're looking at, about 33 million kids enrolled in schools in America in K through 8. So you do see a huge increase in that. So that again is evidence of the baby boom, but it's not just evidence of the baby boom, it's evidence of a strong economy, evidence of the idea that children don't have to work. They can be kids. They can do normal, what we see as normal childhood things. Of course, you see a major drop here during World War II because there weren't a ton of kids being born. All right, we're going to skip over the clips. All right, suburban living. This is my favorite thing. This is what I did in graduate school. So the next few slides, we're actually going to talk about the suburbs. And you don't need to create the graphic organizer and stuff because usually we do that in class when we're doing the notes because this ties into your discussion board. Don't worry about that piece, but we are going to talk about the suburbs now. Levittown. Okay. Levittown is in Long Island. You can tell I love talking about this stuff. Levittown is a town in Long Island. And basically William Levitt was a World War II vet. And he was a builder before the war. He came from a family of builders. And he realized that there was a huge market for homes because of the fact that so many of these GIs, because of the GI Bill, were able to get good mortgages and they now had jobs and stuff like that, that they wanted to buy homes. They wanted to leave the cities. One of the reasons they wanted to leave the cities was also because during the war, when they were overseas, the cities were sort of the center of the worst violence. And they sort of wanted to get out of that. And again, they have the money to leave the cities. So William Levitt and his family decided to take the assembly line process and apply it to building homes. So this is where you start seeing prefab homes. And I know we have some carpentry students in the class here, so you guys probably have a good idea of what I'm talking about here. When you talk about building homes today, it takes weeks, if not months, to build a home. They were building multiple homes in one day, because what they were doing is they were building all the pieces separate from the actual location of the home, and then they would bring all the pieces in, and they would have different teams like an assembly line just putting the pieces together like Legos. And they were building hundreds of houses in a day. Now, some people would say, well, the quality of these houses wouldn't be that good. The reality is the quality of these houses was pretty incredible because they're pretty much all still standing today. If you go to Levittown in New York, it all pretty much still looks the same that it did in the 1950s. There also was a Levittown in New Jersey and a Levittown in Pennsylvania. Both of those have since changed their names. The one in New York still calls itself Levittown, and it's out on Long Island in Nassau County. The thing about these houses is they all looked exactly the same. They all had the same exact size yards. They all had bushes and trees in the same exact places. The houses were all white, and they all had the same basic layout within the house. So that was, again, that whole idea of conformity, keep everything the same. The thing is, they were pretty cheap. You could buy one of these houses for just under $8,000 a month. And with the GI Bill, you could take out a mortgage and you only had to pay $60 a month. Which by today's standards sounds like, whoa, that's so cheap. But even in 1950s standards, that was a really cheap mortgage. So it made suburban living, it made owning a home accessible. And as you can see in this picture, these streets, everything looks exactly the same. All right. So again, conformity in the 1950s. Part of the reason Levitt does that is because, one, there is a severe housing crisis after the war. We don't have enough places for people to live. So he's like, hey, I'm going to take advantage of this. I'm going to figure out a way to build cheap houses. The veterans are going to buy them. And then with the baby boom, people don't want to live in city apartments. They want to let their families have space. Again, the mass production, he built one home every 16 seconds. Yes, he was able to put a home every 16 seconds, a home was completed. And again, a lot of the new technological advances made home maintenance less burdensome. And when I say technological advances, I'm talking about things like the gas-powered lawnmower. I'm talking about all the appliances you can now have in your home, the dishwashers, the electric stoves, the fancy refrigerators, the vacuum cleaners. All of that stuff made home ownership easier and less work. So people were like, yeah, let's buy a home. And again, like I said, you start to see people moving out of the cities in droves. This is what your typical prefab house could have looked like. This is not actually a picture of a Levitt one. The Levitt ones looked like your traditional Cape Cods, which have the second floor on them. But this is an image of what some of the prefabbed homes did look like during this time period. Again, here's the layout of Levittown. You see how everything looks the same. All the lots are the same size. All the houses look pretty much the same. This is pre-planned living at its best. What happens now is you get what's called the American Dream. And we talked about the American Dream at the beginning of the year, and you talked about the American Dream in English class at one point. But it's the idea of that home ownership. These houses were, they were 1 story high, but they were capes, which meant you could finish off the second floor, the attic, into more bedrooms. So what you got when you bought the house was right here. You had 2 bedrooms with the closets, living room, kitchen, bathroom. Then there was the stairs that went up to the attic area, which had like the ceilings coming in. Many of you might live in houses or have lived in houses like that. They did not come finished, but most families did finish them, so that they could add second bedrooms because of the kids that they had. But this was the typical house that you had. One of the things that you'll notice is the closets were pretty small. The closets were small because people didn't have a lot of clothes back then. Today, these closets are just not good enough for us. But then the closets were pretty small because people didn't have a lot of stuff. Um, they pretty much, most of them had garages because, again, everybody had their cars now, and you usually had a small backyard and a front yard. By 1960, a third of the US population is actually going to live in the suburbs, meaning those towns outside of the cities. That's what the suburbs are. All right. So about a third of the American population by 1960 lives in the suburbs. Today, it's well over 50% of the American population lives in the suburbs. By 1951, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists actually encourages people to move away from the cities because they're saying that the atom bomb, if it's going to be dropped on us, if the Soviets are going to attack us, they're most likely to do it on the cities. So they're encouraging people to move out. So that's one of the reasons, another reason why, not just the financial growth, but also the idea that they want to be able to be safe from the atom bomb. And again, the GI Bill and Federal Housing Authority also are going to give loans to people to do this. The one other thing that I want to point out here, and I want to do this real quickly because I'm running out of time for this particular lecture, is another thing that you see is something called white flight. Meaning the white middle class people in these years are going to leave the cities because of the fact that they want to get into a community that's more homogenous, more the same. One of the best examples of this is Long Island, New York, because in Long Island, they built a number of highways that went out to Long Island, things like the Northern State, the Southern State Parkway, things like that. All of those parkways were built so that buses and trucks could not get out to Long Island. One of the reasons they did that was to discourage the poor population from the cities from taking the buses out to the beaches. Again, that idea of white flight, separating the races within the cities. That's another reason you do see another reason playing into the creation of the suburbs. For many, many years, Levittown, New York actually had laws on the books that actually made it so that people that were Jewish and people of color were not even able to buy homes in that community. So it's a very unique situation. So I do wanted to mention that very quickly. Okay, I'm going to wrap this piece up, and hopefully we will, all of this stuff will help you with your discussion board post.